Hey guys, tonight we wander into a garden that isn't quite like the ones you know. Picture yourself beneath a sky that's shifting from gold to lavender. The air is warm but not heavy, and somewhere in the distance, the last call to prayer glides across the rooftops of Istanbul. You're standing at the edge of a palace courtyard, the kind with domed pavilions, carved marble fountains, and neat rows of flower beds just beginning to close for the night. The tulips, yes, tulips, are the main event here. Hundreds of them, thousands even, and the gardeners tending to them aren't just watering and weeding. No, they're doing something else. They're whispering, soft, slow, deliberate. Some hum. One or two simply lean close and breathe gently into flowers, as if sharing secrets or lullabies. It sounds made up, right? You probably won't survive this if you're allergic to pollen or sentimentality. But for the Ottoman elite, this was very real. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from a sleepy corner of the world, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where this reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a few steps forward, the soles of your shoes brushing over crushed gravel that smells faintly of citrus. The garden path winds between symmetrical beds. No chaotic English wilderness here. Every tulip is placed with care, spaced perfectly, the rows bending like calligraphy rather than grids. You pass a gardener on your left. He's crouched, leaning over a flame-tipped red tulip. He's not working, just looking, or maybe listening. He notices you, gives the faintest nod, then returns to his silent vigil. Ottoman gardens weren't just about aesthetics. They were an entire worldview. Tulips, in particular, were seen as divine messengers. Their shape, a single slender cup, was thought to mirror the Arabic word for Allah. Whether you believed that or not didn't matter. The symbolism stuck. It bloomed in paintings, textiles, fountains, and dreams. This is Alail Devri, the tulip era, roughly the early 18th century, when Ottoman elites got very into flowers, especially these ones. It wasn't just a fad. It was practically a government program. Sultans held tulip festivals. Courtiers competed for the rarest varieties. Tulips weren't just admired. They were courted, pampered, even serenaded. You pause beside a fountain shaped like an open blossom. The water flows in slow arcs, catching the low orange light. Somewhere nearby, a night bird clicks once, twice, then goes quiet again. Historians still argue whether the tulip craze started as a genuine cultural movement or as a strategic attempt to distract a restless public from deeper tensions, like political instability, or an empire showing early signs of stretch marks. But in the garden, that doesn't matter. What matters is the silence, the softness, the feeling that every flower is holding its breath with you. There's an imperial guard posted at the garden entrance, but he's not staring at you. His eyes are on the sky, where the first stars are barely beginning to show. It's said that some guards assigned to tulip duty refuse night shifts because they believe the flowers could whisper secrets. Sometimes warnings, sometimes just complaints about too much shade. You step onto a small stone bridge crossing a narrow stream. Cart moves slowly beneath you, painted gold and white, like someone spilled milk in the water and the fish rose to drink it. On the far side, another gardener stands near a raised bed of black tulips. Real ones, deep violet, nearly impossible to cultivate. He moves a small silver mirror across the flowers, bouncing moonlight down their stalks. Is it ritual, superstition, or just affection? There's a fringe tidbit floating in old palace records. One gardener claimed he had to recite verses from the Quran to each of his bulbs during planting, or they wouldn't bloom. Another swore that the tulips responded better to love poems. Neither method was officially endorsed, but no one dared contradict success if it bloomed on time. As you move deeper into the garden, the pathways narrow and the scent intensifies. Not overly sweet, more like the smell of something soft and living, like clean cotton or warm rain on dry stone. It's hard to describe. It just is. In the distance, the silhouette of the Topkapi Palace frames the horizon. Inside those walls, sultans once discussed warfare and poetry in the same breath. They could order a military campaign before breakfast and host a moonlit garden concert after dinner. And in between, they walked these paths, sometimes in slippers, sometimes barefoot, to talk to their tulips, or at least near them. You reach a pavilion shaped like a lotus. It's open on 3 sides, with silk cushions and low tables for sherbet and coffee. But tonight it's empty, just a breeze and a single lantern swinging slowly in a hook. And still always the tulips. Even as the light fades, their colors seem to hold firm. Reds, oranges, purples, whites, some streaked like stained glass, others smooth as satin. They lean slightly toward you, or maybe that's just your imagination. You hear a whisper again, soft, not human. Maybe a bird, maybe wind, or maybe it's just what happens when enough people, across enough centuries, believe that flowers might listen back. So you sit on a cool stone bench, under a flowering trellis, beside a bed of tulips just starting to close. You don't speak. You just breathe and listen and wonder what it was that made an empire fall in love with a flower. You're still seated on that bench beneath the trellis, where the air has shifted to something cooler now, thinner, tinged with the earthy scent of damp soil and the sharpness of crushed stems. The sky above you has turned navy blue, that in-between color where the night hasn't committed yet. And just as you're about to close your eyes, you hear a soft shuffle behind you. No alarm, no rush, just the measured steps of a gardener carrying a lantern. He doesn't say anything, just walks past, nods once, and places a lantern on a hook beside a bed of white tulips, so pale they look like they've been painted with milk. The flame inside flickers, casting long shadows across the soil. This is a common ritual now. Light for the tulips, so they never sleep in complete darkness. You stand again, curiosity pulling you toward a small alcove surrounded by high hedges. It's a crescent-shaped space, half hidden from the rest of the garden. There's a reason you haven't seen it until now. This is where the tulip whisperers practiced. Not a joke. That's what they were called. Not officially, of course. There was no Ottoman ministry of tulip whispers. But Pala's records from the early 1700s describe a small, elite group of gardeners chosen not just for skill, but for gentleness of voice. Their job was to care for the rarest tulips and ensure their emotional well-being. That sounds absurd now. But remember, this was a time when flowers were seen as emotional beings, capable of reacting to tone, rhythm, even mood. Historians still debate whether the whispers were truly effective or simply a poetic indulgence born from too much leisure among the Ottoman elite. But it's documented. They existed and they were respected. One whisperer's nightly task was to recite a specific poem to the Sultan's favorite tulip bed. Same verses, same order, every evening at dusk. The poem, unfortunately, is lost to time, though a few lines remain in the margin of a royal gardener's journal. Something about petals like silk drawn from the lips of angels. A bit dramatic, sure, but also exactly the kind of thing you'd say if you were literally paid to sweet-talk a flower. You run your fingers along the edge of a low stone basin filled with water and floating petals. The water is cool, still. Someone's added oil to the surface, just enough to reflect the lantern light, like liquid gold. A breeze nudges the petals, and they spin lazily in circles. Somewhere far off, a lute plays a single arpeggio, and then falls silent again. You're starting to understand why people fell for this. It's hypnotic, slow, purposeful, a lifestyle shaped around stillness, but not stagnation. In Ottoman court circles, there were unspoken rules for how to walk through a garden. You didn't rush. You didn't stomp. You glided. It was called naz, a kind of affected elegance that meant your movements were always soft, always in dialogue with your surroundings. People were taught how to pause properly at a tulip bed, how to gesture to a bloom without pointing was vulgar, and how to nod in appreciation, as if the flower might nod back. You move like that now, down a side path lined with lanterns hung low enough to warm your ankles. The tulips here are shorter, more delicate, bred not for grandeur but for color complexity. Some are striped like candy canes. Others have petals so thin they're nearly transparent, like veins of quartz. There's a fringe tidbit from a forgotten palace diary that claims one gardener bred a tulip so reactive to voice that it leaned slightly toward whichever direction the speaker stood. He never produced a second one, and some believe the original was secretly crushed by a jealous rival. Proof, perhaps, that even flowers weren't immune to court drama. You hear laughter. Faint, polite. The kind that belongs to embroidered sleeves and tiny cups of bitter coffee. You follow it around a hedge and find a group of noble women gathered on cushions, ringed around a central tulip bed. They're not here for gossip. This is part of the structured evening ritual. Mahabbat Basizi, a conversation garden. These were designated spaces in elite homes and palaces where guests would sit, share poetry, discuss philosophy, and gently praise the flowers as silent witnesses. Ottoman high society didn't just value conversation. They ritualized it. You didn't barge in with an opinion. You let it bloom slowly like the tulips. Someone would quote Rumi, another would counter with Hafiz, and somehow the conversation would wind from the color of silk to the nature of the soul, with no sharp turns. And always, the tulips were listening. Some historians suggest that the obsession with tulips was a safe way to express affection or yearning in a conservative court culture. Instead of saying you love someone, you might compare them to a specific tulip, tall, delicate, rare, with just a touch of purple in the light. The metaphor carried the message. Safer, subtler, and infinitely poetic. You sit for a while, listening to their voices rise and fall like the breeze. No one here rushes. No one here demands. It's a lullaby made of syllables and scent. A black cat weaves between your ankles. She pauses, glances at you, then moves off toward the lanterns. Somewhere nearby, another gardener kneels, not working, just observing. His eyes are level with the tulips. And even though he doesn't speak, there's a reverence in his stillness that says everything. And now you're starting to feel it. That odd sense that the longer you stay here, the slower time moves. Or maybe it just doesn't matter anymore. The tulips aren't in a hurry, and neither are you. You're still in the conversation garden, but the voices have faded now. First into murmurs, then into silence. The noble women have retreated indoors, leaving behind faint traces of rosewater perfume and the small indentations of slippers on the lawn. You're alone again. Almost. There's still the cat, who's now lounging beneath a bench as if she owns the place. You glance at the tulips once more. They seem even more vivid in the quiet. Lantern light reflects off their petals like lacquer, and a few have begun to close slightly for night, curling inward like they're drawing a blanket around themselves. You didn't know tulips did that, but now you do. Moving deeper into the garden, your path bends past a series of raised beds, each labeled in Arabic script, delicately carved on ivory placards. These are the breeding plots, carefully monitored by the Bosun Sabesai, the chief imperial gardener, a man who technically ranked just below the viziers in court hierarchy. Yes, really, in the Ottoman Empire, gardening wasn't a leisure activity. It was a profession, a science, and, depending on your proximity to the Sultan, a subtle form of power. The Bosun Sabesai controlled access to imperial grounds, supervised the planting of symbolic flowers for royal births or treaties, and oversaw hundreds of lower gardeners known as bastanchis. They weren't just flower guys. They were part ceremonial guards, part horticultural engineers, and, according to fringe tales, occasional secret police. Historians still argue whether the Bosun Sabesai's men really served as executioners during palace coups. There are records of gardeners escorting traders along tulip-lined paths to the Bosphorus, where, shall we say, swimming lessons were offered without return. But that's a different kind of bedtime story. Tonight, you're safe. Just you, the flowers, and the steady rhythm of a garden that obeys no clocks. You pause before a fountain shaped like a tulip bulb split open, an architectural flourish from the tulip era, that brief stretch in the early 18th century when all of Istanbul seemed to lose its mind over horticulture. Fashion, poetry, glassware, even embroidery became tulip-themed. If something could hold a pattern, it held tulips. One sultan, Ahmed III, even had tulips bred to match specific shades of his caftans. He held nighttime garden parties where guests wore tulip-inspired outfits and drank fruit cordials under elaborate canopies. You'd think that would be ridiculous, but you're standing here now in the lantern glow, and you can imagine it. Caftans rustling, slippers sliding across silk carpets laid right over the lawn, servants refilling sherbet bowls, while tulips nodded politely in the candlelight. There's a calm to this obsession. Even in its extravagance, it's soft around the edges. Now you approach a small structure tucked between two hedges. Not a shed, not exactly. More like a prayer niche for plants. It's a miniature greenhouse, barely tall enough to stand inside, but filled with tools so carefully arranged you'd think they were surgical instruments. Scissors, brushes, little brushes for dusting off pollen, shallow porcelain bowls for water infusion. Ottoman gardeners didn't just plant seeds and hope. They curated the tulip's life cycle like art conservators. And here's your fringe tidbit for tonight. In some elite circles, tulip petals were believed to hold emotional memory, not in the botanical sense. More like, if you tended a tulip with love, it would bloom more beautifully the next year. Treat it harshly, and the petals would warp. There's no science behind this, of course. But records show gardeners being rotated based on their emotional compatibility with certain tulip strains. Some men were better at reds. Others excelled with pale blues. It wasn't genetics. It was vibe. And in this garden, vibe mattered. You step into the greenhouse. It smells like soil and cedar oil. A single stool waits by the table. You sit, and your weight creaks the wooden floor just slightly. In front of you is a half-finished floral diagram. Inked by hand, measuring angles between tulip beds. Not to improve efficiency, but to better align them with moonlight. You let your fingers hover above the paper, but don't touch. You don't want to smudge the lines. They've waited here for centuries. They can wait a bit longer. Outside, something rustles. Probably the cat again. Or maybe a gardener making his final rounds. You realize they do this every night. Not just planting and pruning, but watching, listening, whispering. The tulips aren't just plants. They're participants in a shared dream. In fact, the practice of tulip tending at dusk was often referred to as leowekusu, the tulip sleep, not because the tulips fell asleep, but because gardeners entered a kind of trance state, walking the rows, whispering observations, mentally cataloging the curve of a petal or the tilt of a stem. No tools, just eyes and memory, and the occasional softly hummed tune. Historians still argue whether this trance gardening was a formal practice or something that emerged organically from centuries of repetition. But contemporary accounts describe men returning from a dusk session unable to speak for hours, not out of trauma, but because speech would wake them too abruptly from the garden's hold. You lean back now, careful not to knock anything over, and listen to the greenhouse breathe, which settles. Glass ticks as it cools. A drop of water falls from a petal into a dish. The sound is small but perfect, like punctuation at the end of a long, quiet sentence. You could stay here all night, and maybe you will. After all, who's keeping track? The moon has crept a little higher, illuminating a corner of the table where someone's etched a tulip in miniature. One petal curled, as if it's smiling. You smile back. You rise from the stool with a soft sigh, your muscles settling into that warm, heavy looseness that comes just before real sleep. Outside the greenhouse, the air feels cooler, touched by the breeze drifting in from the Bosphorus. You let it wrap around you as you step quietly back into the heart of the garden, where the tulips are now barely more than silhouettes. The lamps have been dimmed, or maybe your eyes have adjusted. Either way, you don't mind. The pathways are gravel, worn smooth by centuries of careful footsteps. The garden isn't loud. It never was. But now even the insects seem to hush. You take another slow breath. You can almost taste the lavender and mint carried on the air from the nearby herbal plots. This section of the garden was more than decorative. It was medicinal. The Ottomans believed that to tend a plant was to learn its secrets. Not in the clinical, extract this compound kind of way. No, this was slower. They sat with the plants, smelled them, tasted their leaves in warm water infusions, applied crushed petals to skin, waited, and watched. Patience was the rule here. And while the tulips were the showpieces, the garden beds around them held everything from yarrow to hyssop to wormwood, used for digestion, toothaches, melancholy, even dreams. Especially dreams. Some night workers would rub poppy oil on their temples before sleep. Others steeped a mix of chamomile, crushed date seed, and orange peel to coax better dreams. Or forget worse ones. Your fingers graze the top of a low boxwood border as you walk. You feel its resistance, its clipped precision, like a tiny hedge maze that decided it had better things to do than confuse people. Boxwood was prized here not just for symmetry, but for the faint lemony scent it gave off after trimming. You make a note of it, one more quiet secret in a garden already brimming with them. And there, by the arched trellis, you see another gardener, or maybe it's just a memory. A young man, cloaked in loose cotton, crouched low to the ground, whispering not to a tulip, but to the soil itself. There's no drama to his movements, no urgency, just the same rhythmic scooping and patting. Scooping and patting. His hand moves in tune with a lullaby you can't quite hear. Ottoman gardening manuals, yes, those existed. Recommended songs for planting. Slow, repetitive verses said to calm the gardener and the plant alike. These weren't work songs like in Fields of Labor. These were lullabies. Some historians argue the songs were metaphorical, used more as meditative techniques than actual performances. Others insist the gardeners sang quietly, even under their breath, to each tulip bulb like a child being tucked in. If you close your eyes now, you can almost hear the melody weaving through the night air. You keep walking, careful not to step on the curling end of irrigation threads. Thin channels dug by hand, guided by clay flutes half buried in the soil. These flutes weren't instruments, but they did whistle faintly as water passed through. A functional lullaby, piped into the garden itself. Imagine that. Your houseplant's humming back at you because the plumbing had a tune. And now, the fringe tidbit for the stretch of garden dream walking. There's a story, unconfirmed but persistent, that some gardeners train tulips to respond to voice frequency. Not in a scientific way, of course, but by consistently speaking to a patch of bulbs using the same tone, pitch, and phrasing each evening, they claim the plants reacted, growing straighter, blooming sooner, leaning toward the sound. It's a tale passed down mostly through oral tradition, usually with a shrug and a smile, as if the teller doesn't quite believe it, but also isn't willing to not believe. You find yourself whispering now, testing the idea. Nothing elaborate, just a soft hello. The tulips remain still, but there's a breeze. Or maybe that's just your breath returning to you. As you round a curved line with cypress trees, you're greeted by a low wall, carved with floral motifs and Ottoman poetry. The lines are soft and meandering, praising the night in its silence, praising gardens not as places but as states of being. A garden, the poet wrote, is not something you enter. It is something you become. You run your fingers over the stone. The words are worn but still legible. You imagine a scribe chiseling each character by lamplight, pausing every so often to sip something warm or shoo away a moth. You imagine him humming. Of course he was humming. Beyond the wall, there's a round platform, used once for evening readings and small recitals. Ottoman poets often read aloud to the tulips. It was believed that flowers open more gracefully to poetry. Whether this is botany or just a charming metaphor, no one can say. Historians still argue whether tulip poetry nights were widespread cultural practice or simply the indulgence of a few eccentric patrons. Either way, you're standing in the shadow of it. You step onto the platform. The stone beneath your feet holds the day's heat. You sit cross-legged in the middle, like a guest who arrived too late for the party, but was still welcome to linger. All around, the tulips stand watch. You can no longer see the details of their colors, but you know they're there, the lilacs, the deep wine reds, the peaches so pale they almost vanish in daylight. In this quiet dark, they're stripped of showiness. They are still. Listening, you speak again. Just once. A single word, beautiful. It echoes back not as sound, but as stillness. The kind of stillness you don't want to disturb. The garden has let you in. You don't leave the platform right away. It's comfortable in that soft stone kind of way that only happens when something's been worn down by centuries of respectful use. Your fingers trace the edge where countless robes and sleeves and palms have rested before. And still, those tulips don't move. But their silence is no longer emptiness. It's presence. It's polite. You're being watched by flowers. And somehow that's not unnerving, just affirming. Somewhere behind you, a night bird chirps, a short, three-note call, then quiet again. Even that sound feels like it knows its place in the rhythm of the evening, like it's part of the design. You finally rise and continue along the curved gravel path, shoes barely making a sound. The path begins to slope downward now, toward what the Ottoman gardeners once called Saran Coves, the cool corner. These weren't literal corners. Always just shaded, low-lying pockets where air settled like silk. You step into one now, and it's as if someone opened a drawer full of mountain breeze. And of course the gardeners knew about airflow. They arranged trees and fountains with the precision of physicists. Cypress trees to funnel breezes, poplars to break heat, and fig trees to sweeten the air with their musty syrup scent. Every placement intentional. And down here, you start to notice. The tulips give way to other plants, hostas, ferns, moss creeping between flagstones. This part of the garden isn't for show. It's for relief. This is where the gardeners came when they needed to think. Or not think. Ottoman courts, particularly under Sultan Ahmed III, prized gardens as spaces for poetry, philosophy, and yes, quiet diplomacy. More than a few tense discussions were smoothed out under the calming influence of moonlit lilies and gurgling fountains. Historians still argue whether these garden consultations held any formal power or were just clever ways of calming tempers before official decisions were made. Either way, they worked. Tempers lower when your shoes are off and your tea is steeping next to petunia. You stop at the edge of a small reflecting pool, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a curious fish. And this is where you find the oddest little detail, so far. Small stepping stones through the pool. Not around it. Through. They lead to a tiny pavilion in the center, open on all sides. Nothing inside but a wide bench and a silver pitcher. It's not dramatic. No marble columns or gilded anything. Just wood, stone, and the cool hush of midnight water. You step onto first stone. It rocks just slightly under your foot, but then settles. Each step forward is a step away from the world you know. Phones don't ring here. Notifications do not exist in places with frogs and lotus leaves. When you reach the pavilion, you sit again. You don't have to, but somehow you want to. And sitting here, inside a structure no larger than a garden shed, but carrying centuries of stillness in its beams, you understand something. This was not just a garden. This was a belief system. The Ottomans believed nature had moods. Not personalities exactly, but dispositions, like a friend whose company you crave at different times. Morning light was thoughtful. Noon was blunt. But dusk? Dusk was forgiving. Dusk forgave your mistakes, your weariness, your unpolished thoughts. That's why they came here then, not just to admire the tulips, but to be softened by them, the way soft lighting hides wrinkles and honest tears. And here comes the fringe detail. According to a handful of 18th century travel journals, some garden workers practiced what they called flower confession. It sounds grand, but it was simple. At the end of the day, they'd find a quiet bloom, often a tulip, sometimes a narcissus, and speak their worries aloud. Not in a cry for help sort of way, more like a release. Just a whisper. I snapped a twig too hard. I forgot to water the pot near the gate. I wish I understood my master better. One sentence, one breath, and then silence. Were the flowers expected to respond? Of course not. But the very act of speaking softly to something that cannot judge you, that was the point. It made the confession safe. Historians still debate whether this was spiritual practice, cultural tradition, or simply the natural human need to externalize guilt when no journal is handy. You glance at the tulips again. They listen well, better than most people you've met. You lean back on the bench, and your gaze drifts up to the wooden beams overhead. They're carved with more floral motifs, not flashy, just faint outlines. Leaves, petals, a single bee, not a real one, thank goodness, just the carving of a bee. You think about how much time someone spent making sure even this, a quiet corner few people would ever visit, was beautiful. intentional, full of grace. And speaking of bees, here's one last tidbit for this soft corner of the garden. Some Ottoman gardeners kept beehives in the tulip beds, hidden among the blooms. The bees weren't just for honey. They were seen as tiny co-workers. Tulips needed pollination, after all. And the humming? That was considered soothing, like nature's white noise machine. You sit with that idea for a while. Imagine someone falling asleep to bees, not fearing them, but letting their gentle buzz carry you into dreams. You suspect it might actually work. A bell chimed softly in the distance, bronze against bronze. Probably the mosque's night call, or maybe just a wind-activated chime near the servant's gate. You let it fade, a warm punctuation mark at the end of nothing urgent. You stretch. The pavilion bench creaks kindly beneath you. No rush, no next step, just you and the flowers, and the idea that maybe, just maybe, the best conversations you'll ever have are the ones where nothing talks back. From the pavilion, you rise slowly, like a cat waking from a sunbeam nap, even though there's no sun anymore, only the velvet softness of night. The air's even cooler now, and if you listen closely, you might catch the distant trickle of a garden stream, looping lazily around the lower hedges like a quiet silver ribbon. You take the stepping stones back across the water, your footfalls gentle and spaced. No splashing. The koi below seem unbothered, slipping through their loops like sleepy ghosts. And on the far side, the path splits, not dramatically, just enough to suggest a choice. Left toward the gardener's quarters, right toward the tulip nursery. You pause. Of course you choose the tulips. This path is narrower. The ground crunches with old petals. Yes, petals, faded, wind-blown, not yet swept. It's not untidy, not really, just natural, as though the garden is allowed to breathe here instead of posing all the time. You come to a long, raised bed, low stone walls, soil dark and fragrant, and inside, tulip bulbs. Not in bloom, not even close, just rows and rows of nestled potential, sleeping under the earth like secrets waiting for spring. And here, under this patch of moonlight, the Ottomans practiced something almost monastic, bulb meditation. That's not the official term, of course, but it captures the mood. Gardeners would sit beside these beds in silence, sometimes for hours, doing nothing. No pruning, no digging, just watching, waiting, listening to the soil. Seems absurd, right? But you sit, because why not? The dirt is warm from the day, and the scent of clay and leaf mold is more comforting than it has any right to be. There's a rhythm to this, something primal. You understand why the gardeners did it. It wasn't about the tulips. It was about learning to match the pace of the garden. And the garden's pace is slow. Here's a fun detail. Sultan Ahmed III once commissioned a poem that described tulip bulbs as dreams folded in paper lanterns. The poem was banned within a year, not for scandal, but for encouraging distracting romanticism. You imagine writing something so lovely it made politicians nervous. Now that's power. Historians still argue whether tulip meditation was a spiritual act or just a clever excuse for dodging chores. But the practice stuck. Gardeners believed that tulip's entire personality could be read from its bulb, its shape, weight, even how it smelled. They claimed they could predict color, height, and even bloom duration just by handling the bulb. Sure, that sounds like a leafy horoscope, but then again, when you spend your life with something, maybe you do learn to read its moods. You press your fingers into the dirt. Nothing happens. But something does happen. Inside, there's movement unseen but present. Not from the bulb, not from the earth, but from you. Your thoughts slow. Your shoulders drop. The constant inner monologue that usually sounds like a distracted flight attendant now whispers like a librarian tucking in her books. You lie back, just for a second, on the grass beside the bed. The stars above look bored. That's good. Bored stars don't rush anyone. They keep watch without demanding anything. And now, a quirk worth mentioning. Ottoman gardeners sometimes spoke in metaphor so complex it sounded like code. They didn't say, the tulips are late. They said, the spring moon hesitates to show her mirror. They didn't say, my back hurts. They said, the earth requests stillness in me. It wasn't pretentious. It was their way of staying in rhythm with the garden's logic, the logic of patience, cycles, and unspeakably slow beauty. There's even one surviving gardener's manual, where the entire chapter on pruning is written as a fable about a jealous nightingale. Historians still argue what it's actually instructing you to do. A soft wind stirs the mulch. You smell crushed sage and wet bark. One tiny bulb peeks above the soil. Curious? Restless? No, it's just a rock, probably. But now you're seeing everything with the benefit of stillness. And stillness, as it turns out, is wildly underrated. A small bell chimes again, somewhere farther off. You've lost all sense of direction, but it doesn't matter. The garden loops back on itself. Like a kind story you already know the end of, you rise again, but only when your knees feel like cooperating. As you move toward the next row, you pass a gardener's rake leaning against a stump. The handle is smooth with use, the wood pale and ghostly in the moonlight. You touch it gently, as if greeting a coworker from a different century. And maybe you are. There's a detail about tools in the records. Some gardeners named them, not just for fun. They believed that giving a tool a name created a bond, made you less likely to mistreat it. One rake was known as Whisper, another as Tall Brother. One even had the name Little Shame. No one knows why. That mystery delights you more than if we did. You keep walking. The path rises slightly now, and lanterns begin to reappear. Those same copper-top domes with the slitted sides, casting lazy lines of gold on the walkway. Your own shadow stretches ahead of you, impossibly tall, like a stretched-out memory. Another garden worker, long gone, long forgotten, once etched a single word into one of these lantern bases. Dinnel. It means listen. Not to instructions, not to orders, just to the world, to the tulips, to the moment. You place your hand on the lantern. It's warm, probably from the candle, but maybe from something more. Maybe the garden remembers every palm that's touched it. The tulip beds give way to a small arbor now. Roses, trained carefully overhead, though in this hour their fragrance is gentle, not sweet. The petals are closed, sleeping, like everything else. You pass under the roses, through another gate, and into the next corner of this eternal garden maze. But part of you still sits with the bulbs, with the imagined voices of gardeners whispering metaphors to the dirt. And you carry their slowness with you now, like a secret in your pocket. You follow the curve of the path deeper into the garden's quieter side, where the stones underfoot are more worn and the hedges are slightly overgrown, like the garden is sighing into its own comfortable clutter. There's less symmetry here, less fuss. Everything looks a little sleepier, which is fitting, because this next part of the garden isn't about tulips at all. It's about citrus trees. You wouldn't expect citrus trees to thrive in this climate, not without help. But the Ottomans, being the patient tinkers they were, figured out how to coax lemons and bitter oranges into bloom. They created miniature microclimates using heat-absorbing walls, glass shelters, and clever irrigation systems. You wander now among low, square enclosures, like ancient greenhouses, but without the glass, just warm trapping stone and lingering humidity. The trees themselves are small, gnarled, stubborn things. Their leaves shimmer dark green under moonlight, and now and then a small fruit dangles like a golden pendant from a branch. You reach out just to touch the peel, not to pluck. Not yet. It's cool and slightly rough like suede. The scent that lifts off your fingers afterward is faintly floral. Like citrus and candle wax had a secret child. Ottoman gardeners believed citrus trees could ward off melancholy of the night. Yes, that's a real phrase from one 18th century physician. Melancholy of the night. A kind of emotional fog that settled over people who stayed up too late, stared too long at oil lamps, or simply thought too much. Sound familiar? To treat it, you'd sit under the citrus trees after dusk and let the scent do its work. No talking, no reading, just breathing. Slow, deep breaths, kind of like what you're doing now. Historians still argue whether this was truly medicinal or just another elegant excuse for taking naps under lemon trees. But hey, when the therapy smells as good, who cares? A low bench invites you to sit. Not one of those straight-back, ceremonial benches, but a curved, sunken one, shaped like a smile. You sink into it, letting your arms rest along the cool stone edge. The trees above rustle gently, leaves brushing leaves like sleepy whispers. Somewhere nearby, water drips, not urgently, just enough to mark time. And while you rest, you remember this delightful tidbit. Ottoman gardeners often sang to their citrus trees. Not loudly, not theatrically, just soft, breathy melodies, usually at dusk. They believed it helped the trees relax after a day of absorbing heat and light. The same way you might hum to a dog who's scared of thunder, or talk to your houseplants during finals week, only a bit more poetic. You listen for a tune, but none comes. Not tonight. But maybe, just maybe, you hum something under your breath. A lullaby with no words. As the moon climbs higher, shadows pool beneath the trees. You spot a folded cloth tied around one trunk. Faded red cotton, fraying at the edges. A prayer? A charm? A gardener's lost scarf? No one knows. These gardens are full of quiet mysteries like that. Personal relics left behind without explanation. A boot sole embedded near a well. A tiny bronze bell tied to a root. A spoon with no handle. Like clues in a story whose plot was long ago forgotten. And here's a strange fact. Some gardeners believe certain citrus trees remembered kindness. Not metaphorically, literally. If you treated a tree well, its fruit would taste sweeter. If you rushed it, scolded it, or ignored it during harvest, the bitterness would linger. An old gardener's superstition, perhaps, but charming all the same. You tilt your head back and stare at the sky through the leaves. The stars are dimmer now, maybe behind cloud, or maybe because you're getting drowsier. The difference is academic. Either way, you're slowing down. The citrus scent is stronger now, as if the trees are exhaling. You wonder if they really remember things. These ancient trees, the touch of a hand, the rhythm of footsteps, the voice of a gardener softly naming each branch in the dark. Another debate among historians, whether the citrus groves were used as secret meeting spots for poets. Not court officials, not merchants, poets. A place to share verses too strange or romantic for palace halls. No record survive, of course. Only hints in later poems. A mention of the grove where ink blushes in the dusk. What does that even mean? Who knows? But it makes you smile. You rise slowly from the bench and give one of the tree trunks a gentle pat. Not for luck. Just a thank you. The path now is flanked by more scent, this time from jasmine. You didn't notice it before. It sneaks up on you like a half-remembered dream. Jasmine vines climb the low walls, their flowers glowing faintly like fallen stars. You brush against them as you pass, and the scent clings to your sleeves like perfume from another life. Now, a quick nod to something bizarre. One Ottoman gardener wrote a short treatise about moon watering. He believed watering plants under moonlight made them taller and more graceful. This treatise was never officially published, but scribbled copies made their way into gardener circles. Whether it worked is extremely debatable, but what a lovely idea. Plants absorbing not just moisture, but moonlight, as if grace could be irrigated. You round a corner and come to a small, circular fountain. The water in it doesn't move. It's perfectly still, like a polished mirror. When you peer down, your face doesn't look quite like your own. Softer, maybe tired but content. The kind of face that has spoken to trees, listened to soil, and breathed citrus against the night. You don't linger. The path continues, and so do you. Somewhere behind you, a lemon drops from a tree. It hits the ground with a soft plop, the gentlest exclamation point at the end of the sentence. You don't look back. Ahead, the garden dips again. Lanterns flicker. The scent of sage returns. You walk a little slower now. The garden's pace has become yours. The air shifts again as you enter a section of the garden known as the Whispering Walk. It's a narrow, winding path flanked by tall cypress trees whose branches reach together overhead like fingers in a secret handshake. The smell here is different, more resinous, piney, with just a hint of something earthy and ancient, like a forgotten attic. You step lightly, mindful of the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, and your footsteps seem to fall in rhythm with the faint rustling above. The cypress needles create a natural canopy that dims the moonlight, casting long, wavering shadows. It feels like the garden is breathing quietly around you, alive but hushed. Ottoman gardeners prize cypress trees for more than just their stately appearance. They believed these trees were guardians of secrets, repositories of whispered stories passed down through generations. There was a belief that if you press your ear to the bark, you might hear echoes of conversations long gone, lovers' promises, political intrigues, or perhaps just the quiet humming of the earth itself. Historians still debate whether these stories were simply poetic imagination or part of a deeper spiritual connection between gardeners and nature. But such tales spread easily in a culture where poetry and plants were intertwined. You find yourself drawn to a particularly large cypress, its trunk wide and knotted, the bark rough against your palm. You lean in, half expecting to hear a whisper. Instead, you catch a faint vibration, as if the tree is sighing. You pull back and chuckle softly to yourself. You're probably just tired. But the Ottoman gardeners took this seriously. Some carried small bells or chimes, which they would hang from branches to wake the tree's spirit. Others left offerings, little bundles of herbs, woven straw dolls, or coins at the base of the trees. These were tokens of gratitude or pleas for protection. You spot a pile of such offerings beneath one tree, a carefully arranged collection of dried lavender, tiny silver coins, and a faded red ribbon. It looks like someone's quiet prayer. Another curious practice involved tree tattoos. Gardeners would carve delicate patterns or symbols into the bark, believed to strengthen the tree's spirit or mark its importance. The marks were subtle, lines that caught the light just so, like whispered messages. The idea of tattooing trees might seem odd now, but it was part of a larger conversation about humans and plants sharing more than space, sharing a kind of mutual respect or even friendship. You walk slowly past these marked trunks, feeling the roughness under your fingertips and imagining the gardener's hands, skilled and tender, making those cuts centuries ago. The path opens into a small clearing where a stone bench rests beneath a crescent moon-shaped trellis. The moonlight filters through delicate white flowers that glow faintly in the dark, adding a touch of magic to the scene. You sit, letting the quietness wrap around you. Here's a small oddity. Some gardeners believe that singing to cypress trees at midnight could encourage dreams of loved ones far away. The songs were soft, often hummed without words, meant to bridge distance through sound and silence. This tradition didn't leave many written records, but fragments of poems and letters mention it in passing. As you sit, you hum a few notes yourself, feeling the stillness pulse in the air. The garden holds your voice gently, as if collecting it for safekeeping. There's a faint rustle behind you, a small animal, perhaps a fox or a hedgehog, darting through the underbrush. You don't turn. It's part of the garden's life, unnoticed yet present. You glance up at the sky through the trellis, watching the stars flicker softly. It's almost like the garden itself is holding its breath, waiting for something. A breeze stirs the cypress needles, and the scent of pine deepens, mixing with the faint perfume of jasmine from earlier. You lean back on the bench and close your eyes. The garden hums around you. The rustle of leaves, the distant drip of water, the soft night chorus of insects. It's a lullaby composed of light, scent, and shadow. You think about the gardeners who walked this path before you. Their hands in soil, their voices raised in song, their silent prayers tied with ribbons and coins. You wonder if they, too, found peace here after a long day's work. If they, too, felt the weight of the world soften beneath the cypress canopy. And then, just as your breath slows, you remember the tulips, the whole reason you came here tonight. The fierce, proud blooms that demanded such care and attention. The garden is more than flowers and trees. It's a story whispered through centuries, a story you're now part of. You stand and begin to follow the path back toward the heart of the garden, feeling the night air cool against your skin. The tulips are waiting. You move gently now, quieter than before, as if the garden has shifted into a deeper sleep, and you don't want to stir it. Your feet follow the path as it curls toward part of the grounds rarely visited after dark, the beds where the oldest tulips bloom. The soil here is darker, softer. It smells rich, like earth after rainfall, though no rain has fallen tonight. You glance around and realize this section feels older, not just in design, but in atmosphere, as if the plants here remember things. They probably do. Tulips, in the Ottoman world weren't just flowers. They were metaphors, status symbols, spiritual analogues, even political pawns. They held shape in poems, whispered in embroidered verses, and painted their meanings onto tiles, prayer rugs, and court robes. You bend slightly toward a bloom, not touching, just looking, and its deep plum petals curve like a half-open scroll. Mainstream history often links the tulip era of the early 18th century with indulgence, luxury, and imperial overreach. This was a time when the Ottoman court threw lavish tulip viewing parties. Think candlelit evenings, silk-draped cushions scattered across lawns, and fountains dyed with rosewater. Dignitaries sat beside poets, sipping sherbet and debating the exact shade of a particularly rare bloom. But historians still argue whether this period was a genuine golden age of culture or merely a decorative mask covering political stagnation and economic strain. The debates continue, but here in the garden, the flowers don't care. They just bloom. Here's the quirk. Some tulips were so prized that they were given names as elaborate as noble titles. The bliss of the moonlit window, teardrop of the west wind, flame of the forgetful heart. You pause in front of one labeled, somewhat humbly, Petal Whisper. Its petals are mottled, plum and blush with faint streaks of ivory, and it seems to lean toward you, as if aware it's being admired. Ottoman gardeners, particularly the elite class known as Bostan Sabesai, maintained notebooks where they ranked, named, and sketched these tulips with near-religious fervor. The most ambitious ones even bred their own variations. Cross-pollination wasn't just a botanical strategy. It was a social ladder. Develop the right bloom, and you might get invited to a palace, or at least noticed. One scroll from the late 1600s contains a gardener's musings on color theory in tulips. He compares the striations on a petal to the hem of the sky where dawn hesitates, which is lovely, if not totally informative. Still, it shows the kind of obsessive reverence they had. As you walk slowly between the raised beds, you notice that the tulips are planted in geometric patterns, octagons, stars, even what looks like the beginning of a calligraphic flourish. This was intentional. Ottoman gardens weren't meant to look natural by Western standards. They were expressions of divine order. The gardener wasn't just planting bulbs. He was writing praise in petals. And here comes a delightfully strange fact. Some elite households believe that tulips responded to recitation. Not just music, but spoken poetry. Soft, slow, rhythmic speaking was thought to encourage stronger blooms. There's even an account, though it admittedly fringe, of a noble woman hiring a professional reciter to visit her tulip beds twice a day during blooming season. Paid by the stanza. You consider reading aloud now, but decide against it. Your voice might break the spell. A bench stands ahead, carved from dark walnut, its back shaped like a crescent. You sit. All around you, tulips shift slightly in the night breeze, tiny movements, like heads nodding in a slow conversation. The moonlight catches on a few drops of dew, making them glow like beads of glass. You imagine the gardeners of the past padding quietly down the same path at night, checking the tulips, whispering reassurances, maybe even apologizing for that pruning mishap last week. Many of these gardeners took great pride in their quiet routines. They believed tulips deserve dignity. There are records of gardeners refusing to cut blooms to bouquets, even if requested by palace attendants, on the grounds that the tulip does not like to travel. One particular tulip, named Ink of the Longing Poet, was so rare that its gardener would stand guard during its bloom period, gently swatting away butterflies and bees deemed too clumsy. And though it might sound extravagant, tulip crimes were real. There were cases of bulb theft, secret smuggling, and in one instance, a duel between rival nobles who accused each other of sabotage. A fencing match over a flower. You tilt your head and wonder whether this much passion for petals is truly absurd, or just proof of how much beauty can mean to a culture. A breeze rustles the tulip leaves now, and they whisper together like a soft tide. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sound wash over you. Behind you, water gurgles from a distant fountain, steady, like breathing. The scent of soil deepens as the temperature drops another degree. Somewhere nearby, a night bird calls. Once, then again. You open your eyes slowly and stand, feeling just a little more tethered to this place. You're not just visiting now. You're participating in a ritual that's older than most nations, tender than most love letters, and slower than most people have patience for. You're walking with the gardeners who spoke to tulips, not because they were strange, but because they understood that stillness deserves a voice. The pathway narrows now, winding you toward the back edge of the garden, where it meets the old service walls, tall, weather-worn brick barriers that once divided the outer world from the inner court life. Here, the tulips are fewer, the breeze is cooler, and the silence thicker, the kind that presses gently against your shoulders like a comforting shawl. You pause by a fig tree, its leaves broad and still, catching faint silver glints of moonlight. Beneath its branches is a small wooden door, no more than 4 feet high. Ottoman gardeners use these miniature gates to pass discreetly between sectors of the palace gardens, moving like ghosts in linen vests, unseen but always present. You don't open the door. Instead, you lean against the wall and think about the strange intimacy of a gardener's life in Ottoman times, especially those who work for the imperial court. Mainstream history remembers the Bostanci, the imperial gardeners, not just as planters and pruners, but as a hybrid corps of horticulturists, palace security, and occasional executioners. Yes, that escalated quickly. See, the gardeners didn't just know where the tulips were planted. They knew where the hidden doors were, the blind spots in the hedges, the quietest routes between pavilions. In time, sultans came to trust them with more than begonias. Some Bostanci were even responsible for rowing the sultan's private boat down the Bosphorus, a job that demanded grace, strength, and total discretion. But historians still argue whether these men were truly loyal servants or quiet manipulators, gatekeepers to both the literal and symbolic gardens of empire. You step away from the fig tree and follow the path again, noticing that the stonework here is older, more uneven. A broken fountain stands to the left, its basin cracked but still catching moonlight like a half-filled bowl, while mint grows between its stones. The air smells sharp, green, alive. Here's something curious. Many of the palace gardeners kept private notebooks, small, leather-bound diaries filled not just with planting charts and weather notes, but with personal reflections. One, preserved in an Istanbul archive, reads almost like a meditation journal. The author speaks of the whisper of soil before rain, the private grief of a withered petal, and the sin of rushing. It's oddly poetic and deeply human. You imagine this man, kneeling in the mud with dirt under his nails, pausing mid-task to write about how the light filtered through the apricot trees that morning. The garden was his world. His diary? The only place he could speak freely. That's something you keep noticing. The gardens weren't just aesthetic. They were political, emotional, spiritual spaces, where the court played, the poets wept, and the gardeners quietly shaped the metaphors of empire. And yes, some tulips had political significance. One late-period sultan was said to have banned a certain variety of striped tulip because its coloring resembled the insignia of a rival faction. Another noble woman allegedly sent a rival a wilted tulip bouquet as a not-so-subtle insult during a courtship competition. Tulip diplomacy. Passive-aggressive petals. You reach a secluded alcove now, a crescent-shaped bench under a trellis of climbing vines. There are no flowers here, just leaves, broad ones, with a leathery sheen that reflects a faint silvery glow. You sit down again. The stone is cool beneath you. It's here. Historians believe that some of the court's highest-ranking women came to walk and reflect. When they were allowed, the harem, often misunderstood in modern retellings, was not just a place of confinement. It was a world of hierarchy, politics, alliances, and yes, occasional serenity. Women with enough status had private plots within the gardens. Some had their own gardeners. One sultana was known for keeping a journal of dreams she had while napping among her tulips. Another designed a garden layout shaped like a calligraphy stroke spelling the word patience. And yet, these gardens were not always peaceful. Fringe accounts describe ghost stories whispered among the gardeners. They spoke of a tulip that bloomed red in a bed of only whites, a bad omen, or voices heard near the apricot grove after the death of a particularly beloved gardener. Tales layered with superstition, but maybe also grief. You sit there for a while, the trellis overhead casting a lattice of shadows across your lap. The night is quieter now, but not empty. Somewhere an owl calls. then silence again, then the faint click of a branch shifting. You wonder about the last time this spot was occupied. Did someone laugh here once? Cry? Recite a verse to a petal? Because, as strange as it sounds, talking to tulips was entirely symbolic. It was habitual, daily. Some gardeners, it said, murmured to each bloom while watering as a sign of devotion. They weren't trying to be mystical. They just knew that attention, even whispered, can change how something grows. And maybe it changes the one doing the whispering, too. You take one last glance around the alcove and rise slowly. Your body has relaxed into the rhythm of this place. The quiet has found your bones. And the idea of tulips, once just another flower, is now something much stranger, softer, and oddly sacred. You wander on, past the crescent bench and toward the lower terrace. A step down in elevation, but also a step deeper into the private corners of Ottoman palace life. The stone pathway here has softened under centuries of moss. Even your footfalls hush themselves as if they, too, understand that this part of the garden demands quiet. This was the meditation garden. Not officially, of course. No plaques, no tourist-friendly signage. But several period diaries, both by visiting envoys and Ottoman household staff, mention a lower grove reserved for contemplation, often at dusk or just after the evening call to prayer. A place where high-ranking court members want to walk slowly in circles, eyes low, thoughts deeper. It wasn't just about peace. This garden had a purpose. Because remember, Ottoman bureaucracy was a tangle of favors, alliances, protocols, and unpredictable whims from the very top. Even those who lived within the palace walls often felt as if they were walking a tightrope over shifting gravel. You needed stillness somewhere. And if you couldn't find it inside your own head, well, the garden could lend you some. Here, the layout shifted from symmetry to suggestion. No more flower beds in neat rows. Instead, soft gravel paths curved gently between fig trees, jasmine hedges, and lavender pots sunk into the ground. Aromatics played a role. Lavender to calm the nerves, mint to focus the mind, myrtle to dispel melancholy. Historians still debate whether the Ottoman love of scent was spiritual, aesthetic, or medicinal. Probably all three. After all, a good breeze to the jasmine hedge could realign a bad mood faster than a bribe. You breathe deep. Even now, with the actual flowers long gone, the memory of those scents clings faintly to the stone. Or maybe that's imagination. Either way, it works. And this is where things get stranger. A few rare manuscripts mention the practice of listening to stones. Not metaphorically. Some court members, usually older or those recently returned from pilgrimage, believed certain rocks in the garden could hold memory. They would sit by the same boulder daily, speak quietly to it, and then wait. Not for a reply necessarily, but for a shift in sensation. A warmth, a pressure, a subtle breath of wind across the cheek. You sit on a low wall and place your hand on a nearby stone, just in case. The breeze picks up slightly. A fig leaf flutters to the ground. Nothing dramatic happens. But the silence, it feels fuller than before. Ottoman poetry sometimes describes the mind as a courtyard, and the soul as a garden within it, which sounds very beautiful until you realize the maintenance involved. Constant trimming, watering, sweeping, and yes, the occasional pruning of things no longer helpful. You look around this terrace and try to see it not just as a physical space, but as a metaphorical one. If your mind were a garden, would this be the part where you slowed down, let the weeds stay a while, sat with your doubts and let them rustle a bit? One particularly poetic vizier, who also happened to be quite anxious, according to his journals, used to walk here while chewing rose petals. He believed it softened his expressions before negotiations. Modern scholars scoff, but honestly, have they tried it? And while this might all sound very elevated and serene, don't forget that Ottoman gardens were also full of gossip. Imagine it. Courtiers trailing behind peacocks, whispering sharp observations about which concubine wore last season's sash or which pasha arrived late to prayer. Tulips might be blooming, but so were rumors. That's part of what made these spaces so complicated. They weren't just for beauty. They were instruments, soft power tools, and sometimes weapons. A notable example. During the 18th century tulip era, a time when garden aesthetics and imperial taste went into overdrive. It's said that entire diplomatic strategies were rehearsed via garden visits. Ambassadors from France or Venice would be brought to specific areas, shown particular tulips. Each variety selected to suggest strength, subtlety, or abundance. Flowers as political theater. One envoy wrote, with mild terror, that a single purple tulip held longer than expected by a court translator might have indicated an insult. He wasn't sure. He changed his travel plans anyway. And yet, underneath all the performance, the garden still hummed with its own agenda. The soil didn't care about treaties. The fig trees didn't mind court intrigue. And the tulips? They just wanted dusk. That's when the light softened. When shadows stretched long in floral shapes went fuzzy around the edges. It's when the gardeners, finally alone after a long day of clipping, watering, and pretending not to overhear things, could stop and simply be. Some would sit on the beds and hum quietly. Others recited poetry under their breath. A few it's recorded. Even sang softly to the trees. Folk songs their mothers taught them long before palace life swallowed them whole. You reach the end of the terrace and find a tiny well, circular, barely knee-high, with stone sides smoothed down by centuries of hands. It's dry now, but you lean over anyway. The echo of your breath comes back softer than expected, and maybe, just maybe, a little sweeter.